Chapter 8. Auric Level Iron 1. The fiery rock creature charged at him like a furious bull. Each step shook the ground beneath his feet. Leaves and dirt flew with each impact, while the treetops it passed ignited and charred almost instantly. Its footprints left behind blackened craters, smoldering with embers. The air was thick with the sharp scent of rusted metal and hot iron, searing his nostrils with every breath, even inside the nova. Derek locked onto the massive incoming target and fired 2 plasma shots. The glowing bolts struck the creature's chest, sending a spray of red-hot sparks and shards of rock flying in every direction. The beast staggered to a stop. A notification appeared. Thermoelectric impact. Damage reduced by 70% due to fire. Resistance. It glanced down at its chest, where the 2 small holes burned by the plasma shots were already closing up. Then it stared at him with the 2 blazing yellow slits where its eyes should have been, and lifted a massive arm. A molten lava sphere formed in its hand, and with a swift motion and a deafening roar, it hurled it directly at him. Derek powered up the actuators in his legs and sidestepped just in time. The fiery projectile smashed into the ground, where he'd been standing only a moment before. The impact unleashed a brutal explosion of heat, scattering molten debris in all directions. The ground cracked under the pressure, spewing thick clouds of black smoke and steam that spread through the jungle. Nearby, leaves shriveled and burst into flames. The acrid, suffocating stench of burning vegetation seeped into the Nova suit's ventilation system, filling Derek's lungs. "Analysis," Derek commanded with a cough. "It's exactly what it looks like," Vonda replied. "Again. Which is? Molten lava. What you're facing appears to be a lava monster," Derek finished for her. "I was going to say fire golem, but yes." The creature roared and raised its arm again as another lava sphere began to form in its enormous hand. Derek leveled his plasma cannons and locked onto the glowing orb. His targeting system recognized it as a threat and outlined it in a flashing blue square. He fired. 2 plasma bolts streaked through the air and struck the magma sphere just as it fully formed. The shapeless mass of rock and lava burst like a festering boil, and the resulting explosion was deafening. Fragments of molten rock were scattered in all directions. The beast roared in fury, its arm reduced to a mangled stump by the blast. A message flashed across his display. Critical damage. Thermoelectric impact. ×2. Fire damage reduced by 70%. Due to fire resistance. Derek frowned. The new system was hell-bent on feeding him real-time stats, but half of it barely made sense. Double damage because, what? I hit a critical spot? Minus 70%. That comes out to 60%, right? Not bad. Whatever that means. "If the display is accurate," Vonda said, "you dealt a little over half damage. Not good either." Derek shook his head. "Anyway, the worrying part is fire damage reduced. If that thing can resist fire, then plasma cannons definitely aren't the best way to stop it. Time to try something else." He activated the shoulder-mounted missile launcher. The shiny metal cube rose over the Nova's shoulder with a metallic hiss. The creature, still staggered, inspected the remains of its arm with something that resembled a frown. In a bubbling surge of flames and magma, the missing limb slowly regenerated. Behind the beast, the madman was chanting and waving his staff through the air, like he was praying to some non-existent god. Maybe that infernal chanting had something to do with the creature's functionality, a kind of voice control command. Whatever it was time to put an end to that nonsense. Derek fired. A swarm of micro-missiles launched skyward, their glowing trails arcing toward the creature, which stood frozen, staring up with its mouth agape like a child seeing fireworks for the first time. The jungle shook with a series of explosions. The deafening booms echoed for kilometers, scattering flocks of birds in all directions, and the constant chirping of those strange crickets ceased. A thick cloud of dirt and debris rose, obscuring everything in its wake. Derek shielded his face and waited, armored feet firmly planted on the ground as the shockwave rolled past. He'd seen enough to know better than to assume the fight was over. He wouldn't relax until the monster was truly dead, preferably in dozens of tiny pieces scattered across the jungle. His display remained eerily quiet, showing only his vitals, energy reserves, and weapon statuses. The mini-map was silent. So was the jungle around him. Maybe the explosion had taken out the savage, too. He'd been close to the blast radius, and without his shield, well, unfortunately, Derek hadn't had much of a choice. Something about the silence around him didn't sit right. There was a lingering sense of danger, like the threat hadn't passed at all. It felt like it had been too easy. A golden glow appeared at the center of the thick smoke. Derek narrowed his eyes and winced. What the hell? Before Derek could finish the thought, an incandescent boulder shot through the haze like a cannonball. He tried to sidestep, but it was already too close. The boulder smashed into the ground near his legs, spraying shards of rock and scalding lava onto his armor. Derek tumbled across the forest floor, rolling over leaves and stones, until a massive tree trunk brought him to an abrupt halt, slamming into the Nova's abdominal plating. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and the pain made him curl up like a metal ball. Without the reactive impact gel layer lining his internal armor, he would have been dead for sure. White stars danced in front of his eyes. Multiple red lights and alarm signals erupted across his display. Every part of the armor had sustained damage, with the chest plate nearing critical failure. His ribs throbbed with pain, likely from internal bruising, or maybe a cracked rib. A big warning notification was blinking at the center of the display. Fire damage, critical. Armor structural integrity, 50%. He was panting heavily, every part of his body screaming in protest. The display showed no critical injuries, no fractures, just bruises and stress markers. But that didn't mean he was fine. Not even close. It was pure luck he was still in one piece. And that luck was running out fast. He didn't even know what the hell that thing was. Just that it was fast, relentless, and way beyond anything he could handle in his current state. And he didn't even know why it wanted him dead. There was too much he didn't understand, and he hadn't had a single second to actually think. Vonda, we're getting out of here. Reduce armor mass and reroute maximum power to the limb actuators. Understood. The suit's weight lightened, allowing him to spring to his feet, just as the fiery monster emerged from the smoke, charging straight for him. In the background, surrounded by flames and smoke, the man's hysterical laughter sent a chill down his spine. Moving made Derek's pain even worse, but he gritted his teeth and took off in the opposite direction. His aching legs pressed against the Nova's actuators, which responded smoothly despite the damage. Apparently, most of the impact had been absorbed by the upper armor, leaving the legs unscathed. The Nova, neural-operated versatile armor, the pinnacle of technology, born from his unmatched genius, enhanced and upgraded over the years using ancient Wardalai tech, defeated and on the run. He had been completely and utterly overwhelmed by that old, crazy savage and his absurd, inexplicable powers. His heart thundered in his ears as he weaved through thick underbrush and gnarled tree trunks. The sounds of alien insects and birds had resumed around him, mingling with the drifting shimmer of strange pollen. A glowing rock whizzed past his head and crashed into the ground ahead. A blast of scorching wind and glowing embers slammed into him. He gritted his teeth and veered sharply to avoid the smoking crater. The bastard was dead set on killing him. Derek kept pushing forward, even faster, as the chanting, the man's laughter, and the beast's gravelly roars faded behind him. A glance at the mini-map confirmed that he was putting distance between them. "At least they can't fly," he muttered. He kept running, the suit's joints creaking softly, until the red dots marking his enemies vanished from the map. Despite the physical pain and the damage to the Nova, what hurt most was his utter lack of understanding about what had just happened. He'd just been bested by creatures that belonged in fairy tales. Maybe he'd died back in that pyramid after all, and this was his personal version of hell. A world that made no sense and kept kicking his ass with its nonsense. Too bad he didn't believe in that kind of crap. His eyes scanned the display, and with a mental command, he opened the Nova's status menu. For now, he still had resources. The plasma reactor levels were stable, even if he wouldn't last forever out here. Sooner or later, he'd run out of energy and ammunition. The Nova's auto-healing system had kicked in, working on his injuries. The pain was already fading. He reached the rocky cliff he'd been skirting during his retreat. The surface felt solid and dry, riddled with cracks and crevices wide enough to grip. It rose almost vertically for several dozen meters, high enough to give him a better view of the area. With a sigh, he stretched his limbs and began to climb. The Nova was designed for agility and maneuverability, so he didn't need to be a real climber to do that. Within minutes, he'd reached the halfway point, high enough to see above the treetops. The view left him speechless. Whoever had left him here clearly didn't want him returning to civilization anytime soon. All around him stretched a dense expanse of green, unbroken and wild, as far as his eyes could see. Animal calls echoed from every direction, unfamiliar and alien. The sky was clear of any aerial traffic. Not even the faint outline of an orbital module appeared on the horizon. It had been a long time since he'd seen a landscape so utterly savage and free of any sign of civilization. If the entire planet was like this, he'd have to prepare for a long, long stay. It was clear that his survival in the near future hinged entirely on keeping the Nova active and operational. He didn't know how to hunt or light a fire with sticks, but he did know how to keep a combat armor running with minimal supplies and spare parts, and that's exactly what he intended to do. Derek engaged the actuators, and, with a smooth motion, glided toward the bushes below. Micro-thrusters in the Nova fired just before he touched the ground, softening the landing and kicking up a cloud of dirt and leaves. Strange, vividly colored birds took off in a panic, startled by the commotion. "Vonda, do we have repair drones on board?" "Yes, Derek. 2 repair bots are available. Shall I deploy them now?" "No. First, we need to make sure that lunatic with the staff and his lava monster aren't nearby. Also, we'll need the right materials for repairs. Can you scan this rock?" Derek gestured toward the cliff face. "Scanning now." Graphs and spikes filled his display as the mass spectrometer instantly identified various substances, compiling a long list in front of his eyes. Some entries were accompanied by question marks. That was unusual. "What are those?" "I couldn't identify those materials." Derek raised an eyebrow. "How's that possible? You've got the database for half the galaxy's known substances. I made sure of it. Are you experiencing data loss?" "No data loss, Derek. All systems are functioning normally. These substances have an unknown composition." He shrugged. He was in the middle of nowhere, far from any semblance of civilization. It wasn't impossible that he'd stumbled upon some new mineral. Maybe this misadventure wouldn't be a complete waste after all. Once he got back home with some samples, he'd figure out if they were worth anything. "Great. Looks like there's plenty here we can use. Do you detect any signs of our fiery friends approaching?" "No. Only some strange wildlife." Derek frowned. "What did you mean strange?" "Many of the animal and plant species here, even though they resemble those from Earth or other planets, don't match anything in known records. Their genetic signatures aren't present in the databases. First unknown minerals, and now even plants and animals. Where the hell had they taken him? Anything to worry about? Derek asked. I'm not sure. Using the Nova sensors, I've been tracking a group of animals that have been following us for a while. They're big, but so far, they don't seem hostile. Derek crossed his arms and shook his head. Hoping things would just work out on their own hadn't exactly done him much good so far. Vonda, what kind of animals are we talking about? Are they predators? No, Derek. You would describe them as primates. They've been following us from the trees for several minutes. Derek looked up at the nearest canopy. A branch rustled, and he activated his infrared vision. Vonda was right. They looked like some kind of monkeys, at least a dozen of them. Derek scratched his head, though all it did was make his armored glove scrape against his helmet. The Nova's sensory interface was so realistic that he sometimes forgot he was even wearing it. I guess there's nothing we can do for now. Vonda, keep an eye on them and let me know if they start doing anything weird, like throwing fireballs. Of course, Derek. The sun dipped lower in the sky, and the broad leaves of bushes resembling the spiral ginger plant shifted from deep green to yellow, while the reddish soil beneath seemed to morph slowly into a sea of lava. According to the sensor readings, all local flora and fauna, when analyzed at the nucleotide sequence level, were undeniably alien. And yet, their outward appearance mimicked terrestrial life forms with uncanny precision. It was as if someone, armed with impossibly advanced technology and an excess of time, had painstakingly reshaped this alien ecosystem to resemble Earth, down to the smallest detail. He had seen a few human colonies attempt something similar before, but never on such a massive scale or with this level of success. Faint glimmers floated in midair like shimmering bubbles, resembling a massive swarm of giant fireflies, their glow intensifying as the sun inched closer to the horizon. He had noticed some of these not long after his arrival. They looked like small, milky orbs of light. One drifted close to his face, and he narrowed his eyes. Vonda, do you have any idea what these things floating in the air are? They are. Energy. Derek frowned. What do you mean? It's just energy. Yes, Derek, it's just energy. After a lava monster and a fireball-slinging stick. This hardly qualifies as the weirdest thing you've seen today, right? He sighed, deep in thought. Energy floating around in little airborne orbs, he muttered, staring at the glow. Somehow, the energy doesn't dissipate into the environment like it should. I mean, why doesn't entropy work here like in the rest of the universe? I don't know. Derek raised an eyebrow. You've been saying I don't know a lot lately. I can detect the energy inside it, just like I did with that guy's staff when he attacked you, but I can't do much more than that. This is an energy source I've never seen before. It looks almost magical. Derek blinked. Now don't start talking nonsense, Vonda, or I might actually start worrying. Anyway, right before that lunatic attacked me, you were about to tell me something about the additional data you found after the reboot. What is it? It's hard to make sense of this information. For instance, it refers to something called auric level as a fundamental trait of the creatures inhabiting this place. It seems to indicate how much power or energy they are capable of handling. Derek bit his lip, deep in thought. If I remember correctly, after the system reboot, the text on the display said, Auric level. Iron 1. What does that mean? Iron 1 appears to be the lowest level on the auric scale, but I don't know why that text appeared on the display. It felt like whatever had embedded itself into the Nova's operating system was somehow trying to integrate with the local life forms. Who knows? Maybe he'd end up being able to fling fireballs from a stick at some point, too. A red light flashed on his display. Derek, Vonda called. He remained silent, his eyes fixed on the display. His long adventure in the jungle wouldn't be so long after all, it seemed. "Derek, there's a plasma leak in the main reactor. We're losing power." "I see it, Vonda," he said quietly, his mouth dry. "How long before the Nova shuts down if I don't fix the leak?" Here, in the middle of a goddamn jungle. 10 hours and 28 minutes until full reactor shutdown.